Today's episode is brought to you by Conceiving with Fertility Awareness, a free online course designed to help you utilize fertility awareness strategies to optimize your chances of conceiving naturally. From timing sex accurately every time to identifying potential fertility issues through charting, this course has you covered. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/TTC for access. TTC as in trying to conceive. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/TTC. This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 297. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I'm extra excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Sarah Hill, author of This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. And our conversation is really epic. I loved every second of it. We really delve into birth control and talk about some of the challenges, what we know, what the science tells us about the side effects, but also what we can do about it, how this actually can relate to our lives and answer some of those difficult questions. Are we ruled by our hormones? If we know that birth control changes some of our moods, some of our attitudes, and even potentially our partner choice, what does that mean? Does that mean we're helpless in this equation? And so I really appreciated the insight and just thoughtfulness that Sarah brought to this conversation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my interview with Sarah Hill. And I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Sarah Hill, to the show. Sarah Hill is the author of This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, which we'll be talking about today. She is at the forefront of groundbreaking research on the effects of the pill. A star psychologist with a PhD from the University of Texas, she studied with one of the founding fathers of evolutionary psychology, David M. Buss. In less than a decade, she's published over 50 scientific articles and has secured $500,000 worth of federal research grant money to study women, their health, and their mating and sexual psychology. She regularly features in the New York Times, Washington Post, Scientific American, the Economist, and many others. And today we will be talking about the pill and its effect on your hormones and your brain. Thank you for coming on the show, Sarah.
I'm so excited to be here.
It was funny, I was on your website and I clicked on your CV.
Yeah.
It's like 15 pages or something like that. Like, no, I'm going to need a bio.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So I think that, this is a very friendly audience because I feel like one of the things we were even talking about before we hit record is the importance of having really good science so that we can share information with women so that we can make more informed choices. And one of the things that is said on this podcast all the time is like, we need more research. We need to be doing research. And so thank you for existing and for and for doing this much needed research. I'm really excited to dig in, but just I'd love to hear what inspired you to focus on this area and pursue PhD and do the studies. What inspired you to do all that?
Right. Well, so, just to, the big picture in terms of why I went into the research that I went into, I've always really been interested in human nature and like why we do the things that we do. And a lot of the research that has been done in psychology in like trying to understand human behavior has been done by men. It's looked a lot at sort of male typical, behavioral responses, male typical, like if we're trying to understand interpersonal relationships and sexual psychology, which is something I'm really interested in. And motivation is something I'm also really interested in. A lot of that research has been done, it's by men. It's sort of informed by the way that men see the world. And it's for a very long time was done on men and it was about men, even though, of course, the researchers would sort of apply the results to everybody. A lot of that stuff didn't really sit right to me because men and women are different. And, my background in evolutionary biology really gave me a foundation to appreciate just how different men and women can be and just how different our psychological functioning can be. And I felt like women aren't just little men, and the way that the things that motivate us are different, our behavioral responses to the same types of environmental situations are different. And so I wanted to go into research so that way I could begin to uncover women's psychology. And so a lot of my research is focused specifically on how women respond in relationships and how women respond to stress. And, now looking at the birth control pill and how women's hormones influence their motivation and their decision making. I felt more vibrant. I felt I had more energy. I started exercising again and cooking. I was interested in sex again. I was noticing men. I was more sort of attuned with my own sexuality. Like I felt sexier. I just, it was like I became sort of in tune with the sort of my own femininity. And so I had this moment where I suddenly realized, and it was a little embarrassing actually, given my research. I've been studying hormones, and I've been studying women and how these things influence behavior for a really long time. And I never thought twice about the birth control pill that I was on. I never thought that changing my sex hormones and taking this pill every day is going to change what my brain is doing, even though that's what I study. It just never occurred to me. But then when I went off of it and I was feeling so different, I was like, oh my goodness, of course. And of course I feel different because, there's a different set of hormones that my brain is now using to create the experiences of being who I am. So that led me to the research literature to try to uncover, what does science know about the way that the pill changes women? And once I saw all the information that was out there and also the information that was still missing that we need more research on, I felt like I needed to get this information out to all women.
Well, there's so much there. I have one question for the listeners and myself. How long were you on the pill? I'm curious.
I was on the pill for about 11 years. It was just over a decade.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical.
Yeah, it is.
Pretty typical time frame, yeah. Some women are on it for 20, some women are on it for 5, and so it's kind of right smack dab in the middle.
Right in the middle.
What's interesting, my personal experience, because I am not an evolutionary biologist, but when I was researching on the impact of the pill and hormones, I was really surprised to find how much research there was. So I think that it speaks volumes when people question the scientific aspect of the effect of the pill on the body, because there's quite a bit of research. I just want to jump right into the controversy, I guess you could say. But in your book, I thought it was really interesting. Part 1, you are biology. And then chapter 2, you are your hormones. So I think that this is something where as women, that was when I was reading it, I was like, well, this is interesting. I want to ask her about that, because I think a lot of us are resistant to the idea that we change because of our hormones. As women, I think all of us have experienced some point in your life, if you're naturally cycling and you do experience a shift in your emotions prior to your period and your luteal phase, then often your feelings and emotions are dismissed. Like to this day, I have conversations with my husband about how I'm different
as I approach my period, and I'm like, my concerns are still valid just because
Right.
the delivery is different. So talk to us about why you shared that perspective in that way in your book.
Yeah, there's a tendency, and in a lot of ways, this is illustrated by my own blind spot that I had where I was studying hormones and the way they influence the brain and all of this stuff over here, and then taking the birth control over here, the pill over here, and only thinking about what it's doing to my ovaries. I think that there's a tendency for us to create this like mind-body split, even when we study the brain. So it's like I spend my career looking at the brain and things related to the different biological factors that make us who we are. And I still, like, when it came to my own life and thinking about the birth control pill, I was only thinking about it in terms of my ovaries and like what it was doing there without thinking about the way that it influences my brain. And it's this thing that even the most sciencey of us, we forget it. It's like, because like the experience of being human is so far removed from the chemical signaling that creates the experience of being who we are, that it's like we forget about it. It's almost like we just can't keep that thought held in our head. But who we are, our personality, our likes and dislikes, our restaurant preferences, right? All of these things are the result of chemical signaling going on in our brain. It's like our mind and who we are is a product of what our brain is doing. And, and it's important that we sort of remember that the brain is an organ in the body. And one of the things that it uses to influence how the types of signaling that it's doing are our hormones. And so our hormones are actually not just something that like happened to us. They're part of who we are. They help create the experience of being the very person that we are. And this is something that it's fundamental. And it's a total shift in the way that most of us think about the experience of being the person that we are. I wanted to really give readers just like to really understand this, because it's a big shift in thinking. It's like understanding like, hey, who I am is a creation of this signaling that's happening in my brain. And it's like, there's your neurotransmitters, and everybody knows about those because we hear about things like serotonin and, antidepressants and how they influence our neurotransmitters. But it's also our hormones. Our hormones change what our brain does. They change what our brain does. And what this means is that it's going to change sort of the experiences that our brain creates. And this sometimes can be seen as controversial, just because for a very long time, women were taught, or like we were treated as being less rational versions of men because of our sex hormones and our sex hormones changing across the cycle. But it's like men and women both have sex hormones that change. There's nothing about having changing sex hormones that is threatening to feminism. And there's this tendency, and I think that for a long time, because none of us are taught about hormones. I mean, like, I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about it until I was in graduate school. Like, I didn't know anything about anything. And so it's like none of us really know how they, most of us, unless we go and get an advanced degree, are taught about the way that they work and the fact that men have sex hormones too, right? We hear about testosterone with men, but we only hear about it in terms of like aggression and this sort of thing. But men's testosterone influences their brains just as much as our sex hormones influence our brains. And testosterone changes all the time. Testosterone changes in response to the time of day. It changes in response to seeing a beautiful woman. It changes if a man's favorite sports team loses or wins. It changes in response to seeing a weapon. So like if men see guns, it increases their testosterone. And that influences what men do. And there's no reason at all that it should be seen as threatening, this idea that women's sex hormones change and then change our behavior, because men's sex hormones change too and also influence their behavior. And we can't just denying that our sex hormones are influencing what our brain is doing isn't we don't need to do that in order to demand equal rights. We don't need to do that in order to stake our claim in rationality, because all of us are rational, it's sort of like whatever that means to you. I mean, all of us have sex hormones that influence our brains. And so like we need to steer away from this thinking that acknowledging the role of sex hormones in the brain is somehow threatening to women or to feminism and the ideals of feminism, because it's absolutely not.
Well, I think that feminism, the earlier iterations of feminism were women trying to be like men in the workplace. So it was like we were trying to prove that we could be equal to men or the same as men. And so that, I feel, sets the stage for something different. So I think the new feminism, the one that I would like to be part of, acknowledges that as women that we're not men and that there's a difference, but it doesn't mean that we are less than. It means that we are different. And I think that, so basically, when you start to appreciate that our behavior, our personality, our sex drive, all of these different aspects of ourself are related to our hormone production, then it means, and it's like the big scary statement, that it's possible, that we know it's possible and we know it happens, that women can go on the pill and it can change a lot more of who they are than we would ever like to think about or that we are ever told. So I think that the segue into that conversation could be to start by talking about what our hormones are doing. So for a woman who is not, and I realize I'm using the word woman, there's a lot of conversation. So women and also people who menstruate, you're in a biological female body, you're ovulating. So tell us what our hormones are doing. Say, for example, as we approach ovulation, we're producing increasing amounts of estrogen. So in the fertile window, how do those hormones affect our behavior?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Lisa.
No problem.
Yeah, so as estrogen increases across the cycle, as a woman's getting ready to ovulate and right near ovulation, estrogen is sort of the driver of a lot of women's favorite feelings in the world. Estrogen makes us feel more energetic. We feel more flirtatious. We feel sexier. We also look and smell sexier to men. And there's research evidence of that. It increases women's attunement to men. It influences their interest in sex, their desire for sex. It also influences the frequency with which they are having sex. A lot of the reason for all of this sort of cornucopia of changes that we see is that, sort of at an ultimate level, we know that as, estrogen is increasing, fertility is increasing across the cycle. And so women are sort of investing all of this effort in being the best, most attractive, energetic, vibrant, discriminating version of themselves at this point, because doing this will increase the probability that she'll have have sex and then conceive a child. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that, women are having more sex, and they're really tuned into signs of genetic quality in men at this point. And so it influences who women are attracted to. It influences how attractive they are to men and all of these other things, in part because estrogen, one thing that it does sort of at a proximate level is it acts like a miracle grow in the brain. And so it actually causes new little dendritic spines to blossom on our neurons, and it makes us more sensitive to the environment. And so it's like we become more discriminating, and not in a negative way, we want to no, well, I mean, I guess it is it is a no, not you kind of a discrimination. But in terms of low quality partners, women become they're really zeroing in on signs of high genetic quality. They're able to detect their sensory threshold changes. So women are able to discriminate between the scent of high and low quality men in ways that they're not able to when estrogen isn't dominant in the cycle, because the brain sort of becomes more and less sensitive by changing the number of dendritic spines it has across the cycle. The brain isn't unchangeable. It changes all the time, and it changes across the cycle. And so women's brains are more sensitive to the environment. They feel better. They have more energy. They're tuned into sex at high fertility. And then as we go into the second phase of the cycle, if we're just going to divide it into like the estrogen dominant phase and the progesterone dominant phase, these things go away. When estrogen tanks, it's like, somebody's taking their hand and like scraping all those dendritic spines off the neurons. It sort of decreases our sensitivity to the environment. It decreases our sensitivity to differences between men in terms of these cues to genetic quality. And women generally feel a little bit sleepier and more relaxed, and your body's sort of shifting into what I call the implantation phase of the cycle, right? The first part of the cycle, when estrogen is dominant and you're getting ready to release an egg and you're fertile, you're getting ready for the sort of conception phase of the cycle. So this is all about sex and going out and doing things to put your best foot forward and choose the best partner. But then the second half of the cycle is all about doing things to increase the probability that if you do get an egg fertilized, that it's going to implant. And so it's doing things, it makes you hungrier. So that way you're increasing, your calorie intake to make sure that you're able to maintain a pregnancy if one is achieved. You're more sleepy and relaxed to help ensure that you're not running around and doing all sorts of crazy things that can knock an embryo out of its place, right? And it makes you a somewhat less sexually attuned, sort of sleepier version of yourself during that second half of the cycle.
Well, it's so interesting. And a few different thoughts were coming up when you were talking about it. I think that there's definitely individuals who are listening that feel that this information, it's like it reduces us to a biological function. I'm only here to reproduce. Although I have heard that said, we are here to reproduce, because we are. Right. But it kind of reduces us to that aspect of it. I wanted to ask a little bit about the research in this area. I think it's interesting that there is an effect on our personality, the way that we interact with the world, but there's an effect that's outside of our control, which is how other individuals would respond to us. I find that part to be fascinating. So as an educator, I talk a lot about vaginas and cervical fluid, etc. And I have had a conversation with a number of clients over the years who are concerned because they notice that around the time of ovulation, when they're fertile, that they're producing more cervical fluid, and they can actually detect more of a scent. Mm-hmm. And because as women, we're kind of told that it's all gross down there and we should be ashamed of it, it's like we never have a conversation about, we all have a scent, and yeah, it's more pronounced around ovulation. And there was one study that you mentioned where they actually took, was it yes. I'm trying to think of the word. It was like panty liners or something. They had the women wear them, but they had the men sell them.
They collected panty liners from women and the women wore them at different phases in the cycle. What they find is that when in the way that they actually piped the scent of these panty liners through a nebulizer and had men breathe in the scent through a nebulizer.
What is a nebulizer?
Okay, a nebulizer is something, it's like it's basically, how do I explain it? You give it to asthmatics a lot. So it's like a vapor thing. Okay. So it's like a vapor tank. So imagine like a vaporizer with like a mask and a hose. So like the vapor all goes through the hose and then into this mask and you breathe in. So they basically had this nebulizer and they put these different panty liners in them. And had men breathing in the scent, and men preferred the scent of the women at high fertility compared to low fertility. And it also increased their testosterone and cortisol more. And cortisol, even though we think of it as being a bad guy, it's a stress hormone for sure, but stress is good too. Like whenever we're sexually aroused, we get a big cortisol response. And it's because sex is a stressor. Just meaning that it requires our body to sort of reprioritize what it's investing in to make sure that it's sort of putting its best foot forward. And sex is one of those times where we want to put our best foot forward. The scent of women is preferred at high fertility compared to low. And so there's absolutely no reason that women should be ashamed of this change that we have across the cycle. And in fact, I would capitalize on it myself. It's like we know that, it's like men like this, like, really it's, yeah. And yeah, getting in tune.
One thing that I've said to my clients when this comes up, because you can imagine over the years, I've had some interesting conversations.
I'm sure you have.
So there are women who know this and who will, during their fertile window, like touch their cervical fluid and like put it on like perfume behind their ears and like behind this is a real thing, ladies. Listen up.
I love it.
And I've spoken to women who've done this, and then they'll say like, yeah, if I do that at the bar, it's just like I can't get the men off me. So, I mean, that is not scientific. This is not a study that I just described, but you're welcome to do an observational study yourself. But the point is that our hormones are impacting our own behavior, and it also has this kind of ability to change the behavior of men around us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, because it changes how we smell. I mean, all over the place, including, like our axillary odor, on our armpits and that sort of thing. You see the same pattern where men just prefer the scent of women at high fertility. And, undoubtedly, these are some of the cues, right, that our body provides that offer men a window into our conception status, like whether we can conceive. And men have been wired to, desire women when they have these cues that are associated with the ability to conceive.
Well, and I wanted to, we're kind of going along the line here, but I wanted to touch on mate choice. So it's affecting the way that, men are interacting with us. But I thought it was really interesting, the research that just shows how our hormones, you mentioned that we're more discriminating in that fertile window, and we pick up on the scent of men. And this is obviously not something we're consciously aware of, but there's this kind of natural evolutionary part of our bodies that allows us to choose a mate based on that scent. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So there's been evidence now for quite a number of years now demonstrating that at high fertility, so when estrogen is high across the cycle, that women tend to have a greater sort of interest in and sort of attunement to, for example, things like genetic compatibility via scent. So women like the scent of men who are more genetically compatible when fertility is high, and they're not able to notice differences among men based on cues to genetic compatibility when they are at low fertility across the cycle. And there's also a lot of evidence showing that estrogen across the cycle influences women's attunement to cues of testosterone presence. And testosterone presence is something that is believed to be linked to a man's genetic quality because testosterone is an immunosuppressive. And so men's bodies will not produce large amounts of testosterone if they don't have an immune system that's able to handle it. Because it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's like first line of defense, like make sure you can survive, right? And so if men's immune systems are like good enough to reach that threshold while also producing a lot of testosterone, men's bodies will produce a lot of testosterone. And because it allows them to better compete for partners and resources and everything else. And men whose immune systems are less sort of able to manage threats, because their immune systems aren't as robust, they won't produce as much testosterone because they can't handle the handicap that's created by testosterone presence. And so this is a cue of genetic quality and of health. And so women have been sort of wired in a way where our psychology is really attuned to differences in men's levels of testosterone as being a potential indicator of their genetic quality. And the research shows in particular that women are attuned to these things at high fertility. So when estrogen is high across the cycle, this is a time when women are really zeroing in on qualities related to testosterone and then preferring men who have cues that suggest its presence. So things like having a masculine face, having a deep voice, being somebody who's socially dominant, so who has a lot of social presence. All of these things are linked with testosterone. And what the research, so that research has been going on for several decades now. And it's only more recently that researchers have said, well, wait a minute, women who are on the birth control pill don't get a surge in estrogen. And in fact, estrogen is kept very low across the cycle. Their own levels of exogenous testosterone or endogenous testosterone, are extremely low. And the amount of testosterone in the birth control pills is very low, relative to the levels of the synthetic progesterone or the progestins in the pill. So women on the birth control pill are constantly in a state of progestin dominance. So they never get any of these perks that come along with high fertility and with estrogen. And so researchers were interested in whether we would then see that women who are on the birth control pill are choosing different partners and not as interested in some of these cues to high genetic quality and maybe aren't as sensitive to differences between men and how they smell. And, most of the research seems to suggest that this is in fact the case, and that pill-taking women are not, they tend to choose partners who have less masculine male faces relative to their naturally cycling counterparts. They tend to prefer a less masculine face relative to their naturally cycling counterparts. They are not able to discriminate among men based on scent-based cues of genetic compatibility. And so basically the pill is deadening our senses in some ways that can have an impact on partner choice. I mean, this is, of course, a really provocative thing to think about, because there's a lot of women who are choosing their partners on the birth control pill. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's like, it opens up a can of worms. This is, I think, one of the biggest, the big scary point when we talk about side effects of the birth control pill, because the implications are that if you are on the pill, you are so when you meet your partner, so this is different compared to if you met your partner and then you went on the pill because you needed birth control. This is like if you were already on the pill and you met your partner, then what does it mean? Because let's say you decide to have a child at some point and come off of the pill, what's going to happen then? So women who hear this, I think, even myself, when I first heard this information in the research, I kind of thought, really? And I kind of thought that it was a fringe idea. I didn't realize how much research there is in this area. But I think, yeah, women are scared that they're going to come off the pill and not be attracted to their partners anymore because it happens.
Right. And, and that does happen. I mean, there's research evidence that suggests that this very much can happen. If you choose your partner on the pill, there is a chance that when you go off of it, that you will not be attracted to your partner. Now, the good news is that there's also evidence showing that that for some women, if they happen to have chosen a partner that has some of these cues anyway, that they're actually more satisfied with their partner once they go off of the pill. And the women report more sexual satisfaction, more attraction to their partner, and they feel better about their relationships and the quality of their relationship after they go off of the pill. And so it could go either way, and it can also go somewhere in the middle, because there's also been evidence showing that the birth control, if you choose your partner on the pill and then you go off of it, that there's no difference in relationship satisfaction. And so it's something that's possible. I mean, there's enough research now where I feel confident saying that it is possible that this can happen to some women, but it's not going to happen to everybody. So there's enough evidence out there showing a different pattern that saying it's not going to happen to everybody. And in some cases, it might actually make you feel better about your partner and more attracted to your partner. And so what we need now is more thoughtful research to better understand who's going to end up in what camp. Because it seems like there's a very real phenomenon where this is happening to some women. There's also this other phenomenon where women are finding that they're more attracted to their partners. And then there's a phenomenon where it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So what is it that's accounting for these variable responses? My guess is that, it's going to end up being incredibly complex, and that it's going to have some of it's going to have to do with the women themselves and what their own profile of sex hormones is like when they're off of the pill, because we're all very variable in that. It's also going to depend on what pill they're on, because it seems to me that, if we are to take this idea that women's sex hormones influence what their brain is doing seriously, which I say that we do, because there's every indication from decades of research that sex hormones influence the brain, different formulations of the birth control pill probably have different effects. And there's just no way around that. And the way that the research has been done up until this point has lumped everything together. And we know, for example, that there's 4 different generations of progestins, and each one of those is different. And they stimulate different receptors in the brain and the rest of the body. And so my initial inclination, in terms of ways to move the research forward, is let's divide these pills up at least based on the types of progestins that they're using. Because there's every reason to believe that there's going to be somewhat different effects depending on the progestin type. So that might be influencing the outcomes. And then also, of course, the partner that the woman is with and the relationship satisfaction that they have, like sort of the quality of the relationship outside of some of these like physical factors. So just to give you an example of this, with some research that was done in chimpanzees, which is fascinating, like reading the research about hormonal contraception in non-human primates is fascinating, because they're, of course, they'll just show us everything, right? They'll have sex in front of us. It's like they're totally immodest. And so we can learn a lot from them. But what the research showed was that if you had females who were like on the pill and then went off of it, or off the pill and then went on it, and looked at the frequency of sexual behavior between a female and her male partner, what you see is that there's differences that happen based on shifting pill status. So, you're on it and then you're off of it, you're off it, then you're on it. But that the way that it influenced, like the magnitude with which it influenced the sexual behavior depended on the quality of the relationship. And the males and females who had really good relationships and had like a good friendship and a high quality relationship, what they find is that changing pill status doesn't influence the outcome so much. And that's important information to have. And it's a hopeful message, right? Is that like, we're not, this can influence our relationships, but it doesn't have to. And we don't yet know like what all of the factors are, but we do know that some of them are within our control, and that the idea that relationship satisfaction might be influencing how attracted we are to our partner, regardless of our hormonal contraception status, is something that I think that women should take heart with, take heart in that fact.
I just wanted to jump into today's episode with a quick message from the show sponsor, Conceiving with Fertility Awareness. This is my free online course designed to help you utilize fertility awareness strategies to optimize your chances of conceiving naturally. From timing sex accurately every single time to identifying potential fertility issues through charting, this course has you covered. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/TTC for access. That's TTC as in trying to conceive. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/TTC. Now let's jump back into today's episode.
Well, it sounds like we are more than our hormones, but we're heavily influenced by our hormones. It sounds like there's because I think that's part of why I could completely understand an objection to the idea that we are our hormones. We're just slaves to them, and whatever my estrogen is doing today is going to determine exactly who I am. But if we don't acknowledge the role that these hormones play, I think that is problematic. So with this topic, I mean, in the book, you go into some of the controversial implications of this. So we've got that biological kind of determination issue with if you're not able to pick up on those scent cues and you're picking a partner that is potentially less well matched from a genetic standpoint. And I came across some research on this stuff as well. And it's like you don't even want to say it out loud, but there is some research to suggest that there could be an impact on your ability to have babies and their health. So it's really controversial. I feel like you can never even say that without just immediately retracting what you said.
Right. And like apologizing and like caveats and hand waving.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that the research is there, and of course it's not in every case, as you mentioned, but there's a certain percentage of couples who could certainly be impacted by this. So then for the woman who's listening, for women who have taken the pill or are coming off the pill or met their partner on the pill and are freaking out right now, what can we do? I mean, we pose this information, but what can we actually do?
Right. Well, I mean, so, for women who have already chosen their partners, right? You chose your partner, you were on the birth control pill, like rest assured that whatever is happening in the context of your relationship is going to be influenced by more than just the birth control pill, right? Like I said, it's going to be interacting with a variety of different factors, including your sort of own hormone levels when you are off of the birth control pill, your number of hormone receptors you have, the quality of the relationship you have with your partner. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that are going to be influencing a person's outcomes. And so don't feel like this is your fate. And I don't believe in that anyway. We can modify any sort of a biological pattern that we want to. It's like one of the amazing things about being a human being is that we're able to do that. And so I would say take heart knowing that there's factors other than your pill-based status that are going to influence your relationship outcomes. This being said, I do think that there's wisdom to the idea that if you are not in a relationship or you're not sexually active, because of course we can have sex outside of relationships, but if you're not sexually active and you are considering looking for a partner, maybe this is a good time to take a break from the pill. As a means of risk management, right? Just, sort of managing your risks. I am somebody who, sort of believes in that and sort of taking a risk benefit, approach to things. Why not let your naturally cycling hormones have a crack at mate choice? That would be, if you're somebody who's in that position, who does not have a partner, that would be my recommendation, is that maybe you think about that. Again, I wouldn't make the recommendation of what somebody should do because that's going to be something that they know a lot better than I do. But I'd make the recommendation of at least considering that as an option because it would minimize the risk of these types of outcomes that sort of frighten women. But again, for women who have chosen their partners on the pill, the research doesn't suggest that they're screwed.
That's good. Yeah. It made me think of some of the research that you were mentioning in your book on cheating in relationships and how depending on the, I don't know how you say it, depending on the genetic stat, I don't know, but there were all these different factors. And it was like, I think you said in the book, if a woman has like a sexy husband and she's naturally cycling anyways, that she would be wary of other women who are in their ovulatory cycles, like get away from my man type of thing, which was really interesting. And then women who were, say, with less sex. So obviously sexy is a scientific term, but with less sexy husbands,
right,
partners, then they would be more inclined, like they would feel like around their ovulatory window, they would actually feel attracted to other men outside of their relationship. So it's very interesting how that could kind of mess with your brain, especially if you've been with someone for a really long time and then you go off the pill and you start having these sexual feelings for random guys.
Right. Yeah. But I think that one of the things I have to say about this, and so I've spent the last almost 20 years of my life studying human nature and sort of understanding some of the things about us that are incredibly beautiful and altruistic and like these great acts of human kindness that we're capable of and that we're sort of hardwired for, but also that some of the things that are less desirable that we're sort of, are part of our toolkit as a human. And I have to say that understanding what's going on with you as a person is really powerful. And I think that it allows us to be able to think ourselves out of doing things we'll regret. And I really think that that's true. I think that there are a lot of men and women who have beat themselves up because they feel like they're a terrible person for noticing or even feeling attraction to people other than their partner. And I don't think that that's worth beating ourselves up over. I mean, it's one thing to feel like, wow, I'm attracted to this other person, but then you can sort of acknowledge like, yeah, there's a reason for that. I'm not a bad person, but I get to control what I do. And then you can set up the world in a way that's going to allow you to meet your long-term goals. People who want to be in long-term relationships, that's a goal of theirs, is maintaining the integrity of their long-term relationship. And if that's what your goal is, and you're noticing that during this time in my cycle, I notice these guys, you can set your world up in a way, your own personal life up in a way that is going to minimize the likelihood that you're ever going to even feel the slightest bit of temptation to do something that would be counterproductive to your long-term goals. I mean, I think that, when we experience counterproductive drives or impulses, like I want to eat chocolate cake all day long. Right. Like if I had my choice, like that's what I would do. I would do it all day and it would be amazing. It would be amazing. Then I would feel terrible, right? Because it'd be counterproductive to my long-term goals and my long-term health. But understanding like, okay, I really like this is what I would like to do and it's counterproductive and I'm sort of wired to like sweet and fatty things because it would have blah, 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 promoted the survival of my ancestors. I can set up my world in a way where I don't have access to chocolate cake all the time. It's like I know what I'm doing when I make my grocery list and I don't bring it into the home because I know that if it's there, I'm going to eat it and all day long. And so, I think that understanding the way that we work, we need to not see it as a threat and not see it as, I think that it's the more that we understand ourselves and understand that human nature is complex and we are capable of amazingly beautiful acts. And we're also capable of doing things that we shouldn't be proud of, and sort of setting up ourselves in a way that allows us to be the person we want to be. I think it's very powerful. In having that information, I think is so much better than trying to pretend that we're all perfect, flawless characters who would never do anything to harm anybody ever, because that's just not the way that we're built. We're complex and we're capable of beautiful and terrible things. And so like, how can we arrange our lives to shine the light on the beautiful things and prevent ourselves from sort of falling prey to some of the negative aspects of human behavior?
I love that because it's really acknowledging that, again, we are not simply our hormones just running around mindless. Right. And it can help us to understand what is happening. I think that is what this conversation comes down to. And whenever I talk about side effects of the pill, which is frequently, it always comes down to, if we have this information and if we understand it, then we're able to make the choices that feel best for us at this time. It helps us to make informed choices. And then when things happen, if you do experience certain changes or certain things, then at least you have a bit of an explanation for it.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's it. Especially, when we talk about the birth control pill and talk about how women have been experiencing things like changes in mood or changes in their ability to think clearly. One of the things I talk about in the book is how the pill can influence learning and memory and our ability to cope with stress. And women have been experiencing these things and talking about them with their girlfriends for years. Since the pill first came on the market, these are the conversations that women are having. And they go to the doctor's office and they try to talk about it. And they don't even have a language to explain what's happening because they aren't told about this stuff. And because doctors don't read the neuroscience literature and they don't read the psychology literature, because it's like science is unfortunately very compartmentalized, and you have medicine over here, which is focused on things like stroke and pulmonary embolism. And then you have neuroscience and psychology over here, which is focused on normal day-to-day operations in the brain. And the two areas don't communicate with each other. And so doctors aren't aware of this research. So they're not really able to serve their patients in this way and sort of say, oh, well, here's why you're experiencing this and you aren't crazy. And instead, women are just like, I don't feel like myself. Like, how do I explain? Like, I don't feel like myself. And then the doctor's like, well, sorry,
it couldn't possibly be the pill. You could try this other one, but
yeah, exactly. And so it really, this is about giving women the tools that they need in a language that they need to explain to themselves, and then also to their partners and their friends and their loved ones and their daughters and their mothers, what's happening with them. And even again, for women who choose to be on the birth control pill, I think there's so much power that comes from understanding what's happening to you that can allow you to get out of the situation, because it's like we have this amazing capacity with our big frontal lobes to be able, in executive function, to be able to think ourselves out of things, and it's like when we understand what's happening to us, we can set up our own personal life in a way that's going to allow us to maximize our ability to be who we want to be, and not just sort of feeling like we're at the whim of what's happening to us. We can say, I know what that is. I know why it's happening, and I don't choose to focus on that. I'm going to focus on this other thing instead. Or I understand why this is happening. I am not crazy. Now I need to focus on finishing my reading for class or whatever.
Yes, definitely. And I always say that when you educate women about the side effects of hormonal birth control, I feel that women fall into one of three categories. Some women would, with this information, it's going to freak them out. So there's a smaller percentage of women who'll be like, well, I'm never going to touch that. there's a larger percentage of women who would still take the pill, and with the knowledge, they probably would modify their use in some way. So whether that's that they cut the time that they use it or something like that. And then there's another camp of women who would use the pill for just as long. And when I look at it, I always say, this information gives us the ability to just make those changes. Because there are women for whom, if they learn about this, then at some point they would say, okay, I really needed to be on the pill when I was in high school. I really needed to be on the pill when I was in college. And now that I understand how it works, I think that I'm older now. I feel more comfortable. Maybe I'm in a more, long-term relationship, et cetera. So I feel more confident in trying a different method. And those are the choices that we deserve to have.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And having all this information and being able to make these kinds of choices, I think is like the most feminist thing that you can possibly do, and not running from the information and sticking your head in the sand, because it's like we need to not be afraid to have these conversations about who we are and how we respond to things. And so that way people can make informed choices. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are so many things that have effects that we understand are bad for us, and we do them anyway. And I'm not saying the birth control pill is bad for us, but just rather that, we're making trade-offs. Everything is a trade-off. And so understanding what those trade-offs are, so that way you can make them with your eyes wide open is been my goal with the book, is just inform.
Well, I've certainly had people, like when I share my stance and I say, well, if someone's on birth control, they're making that decision. People will say, well, how could you be okay with someone being on birth control knowing everything that it does? And I'm like, well, people drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, shoot heroin. People do all kinds of stuff. I'm not comparing the pill to heroin, but I'm just making a point that people, on the cigarette packages in Canada, there are pictures of like rotten mouths and people smoke. And so we know if we're informed of the risk, then it allows us to make the choices that we want to make. Right. So I just don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, right. And it's like, and just because like, what the trade-offs are, and like, you might say, well, I wouldn't choose to take this myself right now at this point in my life. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the right choice for everybody. I mean, it's just about having the information, because for each one of us, we all have very different lives, and each one of us responds to the pill in a very different way. There are some women who have absolutely no issues with it ever. And amazing. I wish that we knew why they did, and other women have different experiences. And that's like where research needs to go. But it's like, there's no way that we can make blanket recommendations for what women should or shouldn't be doing with their bodies. That's like something that each one of us gets to make for ourselves. And then the best thing that we can do, people like you, people like me, and is just to inform, and then allow women to take that information and then allow them to create the life that they want using all the tools that they have.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's 100 different questions I could continue to ask you, because there's a lot of topics that you covered in the book that we didn't have an opportunity to talk about today. So the listeners will just have to grab a copy of it. You talked about the impact of birth control pills on stress response, depression, libido. Suicide was in the depression, and you alluded to the potential issue of interfering with natural puberty, because guess what? Puberty is governed by hormones. I often wonder that, like, what happens if you take a girl before she's finished puberty and throw these synthetic hormones on her? So there's lots of great discussion and conversation to be had in the book. But given the conversation that we had today, for the listener who is kind of just mulling this all over, what, if anything, would you want her to take from our conversation?
I mean, I think that we need to take the pill seriously and treat it like the big deal that it is. And just this idea that I think we've been really cavalier with the birth control pill, and we don't spend any time really thinking about the fact that when we're changing our hormones, that we're not just changing what our ovaries are doing, that we're changing what our brain is doing, and that it has a really wide range of effects on our psychological functioning. And in the book, of course, women will be able to learn about all the different areas in your life that you should sort of be monitoring to keep track of how you're performing when you're on the pill versus off of it. So that way you can kind of determine how you feel and whether you need to try a new pill or try something else. And so it's just really that, I guess, like the message that I want to say is take the birth control pill seriously, learn yourself, trust your body and how you're responding, and don't take no from don't take no as an answer from your doctor if you try to explain, I'm feeling this and I want to try something else, that whether something else means just a different pill or something else altogether. Find a healthcare practitioner, and there's plenty of really amazing doctors out there. Just find somebody who's going to listen to your concerns and then work with you to try to find something that works for you, whether that means being on or off of the birth control pill.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Love that. Sarah, thank you for being here.
This is so fun. I feel like we could, we just nicked the surface.
I know.
Thing where we just like talk about this every week.
I know, like 6 hours later. But I mean, that's the hard thing when you write a well-researched book, because it means that who knows how many papers you've read, tens of thousands over the years.
I read stacks.
And I just want to I love it makes me sad on the inside, but I love at the beginning of the call when you said, you're like, I literally study this all day long. And it didn't occur to me until I came off the pill and noticed a difference within myself that this stuff could actually affect who I am and functioning. So I feel like I just wanted to say that because I think it brings the episode to a nice place. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. The book is This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. It's a great read. It's such an important book. Lots of great research. So if you're into books that are evidence-based, that show you where the information is coming from, you will love it. And so where can the listeners go to buy the book and to learn more about you and what you do?
They can find the book anywhere that books are sold. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, wherever it is that you like to buy books. You can go and buy it there. And you can find me at my website, which is sarahehill.com, and that's Sarah with an H. And I'm on all the social media platforms, and my handle is Sarah E. Hill, PhD.
And where do you teach? Just put it out there.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm like, where is it? Because I was saying to Lisa, I have to go teach class. I'm at TCU, which is in Fort Worth, Texas.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. This was awesome.
All right, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/297. Oh my goodness, where to begin? I hope that you enjoyed my interview today with Sarah Hill. I mean, what a great conversation. Thanks again, Sarah, for coming on the show. As we were chatting, we realized we could probably do this multiple times and have multiple conversations because there's so much to get into, even different areas. If you haven't yet grabbed a copy of Sarah's book, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, and you're interested in these areas and you've always wanted to know more about how the pill could possibly impact your sex drive, your relationship choice, and all these different factors, then I would highly encourage you to grab a copy. These are topics that I touch on in the Fifth Vital Sign, and what's interesting is that Sarah has written a whole book about the specific ways that hormonal birth control can really change our brain and our interactions and our relationships and how we perceive the world and our experience of it. And somehow she does it in a way that isn't total anti-pill, and it's really in a way that educates you, helps you understand what the actual research is saying, and also gives you the agency then to make those decisions for yourself. And really, that's what this is all about. And it's so interesting. I always feel like I have to walk this line, not between bashing the pill and providing information. But I don't necessarily think that the two should be mutually exclusive. At the end of the day, if there are specific prescriptions, medications that are available to us, there is no reason why we shouldn't have the full information about what it is doing to our bodies. And one of the most important aspects, I think, of the education for women about the menstrual cycle and contraceptives and how they all work together is that our menstrual cycle really is tied to our overall health. And this is beyond our physical health. It extends into our emotional health. And this is why taking hormonal birth control can have and does have for many women an impact on their emotional health, an impact on their level of anxiety, their propensity to develop panic attacks, and whether it's immediate onset after taking after just starting taking hormonal birth control, or whether it's several years after. And we have evidence and information that the pill does affect our partner choice, our mate choice, our sexual arousal level, even our experience of sex from a physical standpoint, how sensitive our sexual organs are to touch and to stimulation. And so it's really important to be able to have these conversations so that we can make those informed decisions of what is really going to be best for us in the moment. And so I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Like I said, it was such a great conversation, and I could definitely have stayed there all day. And I'm pretty sure that right after I did the interview, I made sure to download it so I could listen to it again, because there was just so many gems that came up. So if this is an episode that you know a friend, or you know a few friends who you're just like, oh my goodness, so-and-so needs to hear this episode right away, the link once again is fertilityfriday.com/297. So this is a great episode to share for anyone who just has questions or has had certain experiences on birth control and might not have known how common those experiences are, or just somebody who is in that stage of just being curious about the pill and what it does. So definitely a great episode to share. And I just want to thank all of you for taking some time out of your busy days to tune into the episode, and also for spreading the word about Fertility Friday, for sharing this episode with your friends. We will be talking about today's episode in the Fertility Friday Facebook community. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/community for your invitation to join us in there. And so with that said, I hope you have a wonderful week, weekend, day, evening, whenever you're listening to the episode, whether you're out on the go or whether you're just, chilling out at home, whatever you're doing, I hope that you're having a wonderful day. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.